When Final Fantasy XVI stepped back into the spotlight a few weeks ago, its primary objective was to place more focus on the world. Not only was this achieved in rather consummate fashion, but by taking this approach, we got additional layers of context that helped to enhance much of the information that had already been gleaned from the two previous trailers, as well as countless interviews. Now, it should be said that we'd known for some time that there was going to be a new dump of Final Fantasy XVI information arriving towards the end of the year, as well as what would be covered. And that's because back in June, Naoki Yoshida, who is the producer of Final Fantasy XVI and has thus far served as its main cheerleader, shared with Famitsu that the marketing team were planning to reveal more information about Final Fantasy XVI this fall. But it wasn't just the timeline revealed. Instead, Yoshida divulged that the team were hoping to disclose more information about not just the world of Valisthea, but that they also wanted to showcase more of the game's lore to provide context, and to lift the lid on the various icons that have so far been shown, providing additional layers of information as to the role they will play within the story. Last month, at the Tokyo Game Show, Yoshida then revealed more specific timelines for when the next trailer would be shown, although this information was kind of shared begrudgingly. Yoshida was attending the 2022 Japan Game Awards, as Final Fantasy XVI was the recipient of the Future Division Award. After receiving the award, a journalist from Famitsu proceeded to ask Yoshida a few questions about Final Fantasy XVI. This was despite not pre-warning anyone at Square Enix that they would be doing so. As such, no official talk track had been discussed. Yoshida was off script, and he had to limit what was being said to avoid anything being taken out of context. It was quite uncomfortable, with Yoshida even chiding the journalist for the lack of etiquette. But he was still graceful enough to answer the questions that were put forth, and ended up sharing that, even though it was not 100% confirmed, he believed that the next Final Fantasy XVI trailer would be released sometime next month. In other words, he believed we would see the trailer in October. Well, the trailer did indeed land in October, on the 20th to be precise, but instead of there being some big fanfare, or it being the focal point of a wider broadcast as we had seen before, Square Enix chose to not only sandwich it between two huge broadcasts relating to Resident Evil and Silent Hill, they also chose to do a shadow drop of the trailer on their own YouTube channels, but also IGN's, as they clearly have an exclusive coverage agreement, something that was unfortunately evidenced as IGN did their best to ruin the surprise by accidentally publishing their thoughts of the trailer 3 to 4 hours before it was actually shown to us mere mortals within the general public. It was a shame, but it did little to ruin the spectacle, as like many of you who are watching this video, I was transfixed by what was being shown for what felt like an eternity. In truth, the Ambition trailer only clocked in for 4 minutes and 31 seconds, but that still made it the longest trailer published as part of the promotional campaign so far, and housed within, there were some very intriguing details relating to the story, some quite obvious, with others requiring a much keener eye to interpret. And as we talk about the subject of interpretation, I'd like to make a small segue. In the past, we've been known for conducting extensive surveys relating to both the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XV. These surveys have been taken by tens of thousands of people, allowing for some fascinating data analysis that has even caught the attention of Square Enix. We're planning to do the same for Final Fantasy XVI post-launch, but to up our game, and hopefully provide some even more insightful coverage as to how opinions change over time, we're also conducting a pre-launch survey. It's available right now via a link in the description, so if you could spare 5 to 10 minutes of your time, either now or after you've finished watching the video, we'd very much appreciate it. We'd also very much appreciate anything you could do to share this out amongst your communities, as the more people who take the survey, the more compelling the insights. Ever since the original Awakening trailer and the launch of the official website not too long after, it's been quite clear that Final Fantasy XVI may have thematic similarities with games from the franchise's illustrious past, most notably Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII. But following the Dominance trailer, it was also quite clear that Final Fantasy XVI is going to be its own beast. From a creative perspective, the developers are now very confident with their approach, but it wasn't always the case, and this was caused by how muddied the handling of Final Fantasy has been over the past 2 decades. It's something that Hajime Tabata addressed in the build-up to Final Fantasy XV, calling the brand a disease, And when speaking with Japanese publication Game Watch Japan, Kazutoya Maehiro, who will serve as the creative director on Final Fantasy XVI, noted that due to how infrequent main numbered Final Fantasy games have been in terms of their release scheduling, Square Enix has inadvertently created a disparate fan base with very defined pockets of fans. The consequence is that these pockets each have very different expectations for what they believe a Final Fantasy game should be. Yoshida was quite blunt about this too, noting that he's well aware that to some people, Final Fantasy is not Final Fantasy without command-based combat or airships or certain graphical styles. When working on Final Fantasy XVI, especially towards the beginning of development and planning, it meant the senior team found it quite difficult to figure out what type of Final Fantasy game they should make, and how Final Fantasy XVI should relate to what had come before. Part of this was based on their own opinions, and part of this was based on how they might appease fans based on their own expectations. And after careful consideration, they were able to make the commitment towards a bold, new vision for what they believe Final Fantasy should be in the modern era. It means that in relation to previous Final Fantasy games, Maehiro believes that Final Fantasy XVI will be completely different in terms of production and game design, visual style, and combat systems. But in spite of that, they still hope that the essence of Final Fantasy remains, something they believe came through with the most recent trailer. In that regard, unlike the previous two trailers, Yoshida noted that the Ambition trailer was designed to win over RPG enthusiasts. He noted that the Awakening and Dominance trailers were more there to set the scene and get general gamers excited about the action-based gameplay. Ambition, on the other hand, had an intentionally slower pace, focusing on introducing the lore and exciting the imagination of expectant players. And it's why they no doubt shadow dropped the trailer, as it was meant to be found and enjoyed by people who have an active interest in Final Fantasy XVI, as opposed to those who may not even know the game exists. It's an interesting approach, and based on some polls we ran this past week and 3 months ago, it appears to have worked, as Final Fantasy XVI has gone from being less anticipated amongst our fans to now being more anticipated in relation to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But that they released 3 trailers, each with different objectives, also highlights the various audiences they are attempting to target at the same time as they strive for mass market appeal. It's also an approach that will no doubt create even more rifts within the fanbase, with Yoshida sharing that there have even been conversations happening internally at Square Enix as to whether Final Fantasy XVI even feels like enough of a Final Fantasy game to warrant using the branding. In spite of this, it's a risk the developers are willing to take, as they believe it's necessary to stay true to themselves. After all, they are the ones dealing with the pressure of creating the next Final Fantasy game, so it should be something they believe in and want to invest their time and effort into. It's why they have chosen, for example, to develop a completely new gameplay system from scratch, as opposed to iterating on a previous system, even though the combat in the Final Fantasy VII Remake was lauded. And it's why they've chosen to develop a story that will focus on Clive Rossfield as the main playable character, who's only supported throughout his quest by an inconsistent cohort of guest characters as opposed to a fixed group of allies. But before delving further into those particular aspects, we're going to focus on an aspect of Final Fantasy XVI that has drawn a lot of attention: the world. Valisthea has been made out to be a prominent part of Final Fantasy XVI, with the Ambition trailer showcasing this particular area in a purposeful manner. What's been shown so far has been quite extensive, but it's also left a lot of room for interpretation, making quite a few fans giddy with excitement because there's just so much potential and so many allusions to the past. Part of this comes from the lineage of the senior developers such as Maehiro and Yoshida, who have either had direct involvement with games like Tactics, Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy XII, or been heavily inspired by them. But it also comes from the fantastic work that's been done by some of those same senior developers who, alongside a huge volume of talented individuals, managed to build Final Fantasy XIV into one of the most beloved and expansive Final Fantasy games to have ever been created. We've known for a long time that there will be 6 key locations featured throughout Valisthea: the Grand Duchy of Rosaria, the Holy Empire of Sanbreque, the Kingdom of Wallode, the Dalmacian Republic, the Iron Kingdom, and lastly, the Crystalline Dominion. It's likely that 5 of the 6 states will be drawn into conflict, with the spread of the Blight making land inhospitable, and the resources provided by the Mother Crystals starting to become scarce. Each will act with differing justifications, and some of those justifications have been revealed via small lines of dialogue shared by the figureheads of those 5 nation-states. Those lines of dialogue then tie back to the name of the trailer, as they highlight each of their ambitions. The Archduke of Rosaria, for example, says, "At the very least, we must secure Drake's Breath." This suggests that despite their more reserved and traditional nature, Rosaria feel as though they have no choice but to wage a military campaign against, we assume, the Iron Kingdom, who control Drake's Breath from their islands to the west of Rosaria. The Holy Empire of Sanbreque is also planning a military campaign, but unlike Rosaria, which seems to be more based around survival, their conquest has been positioned around greed and dominance, something that not everyone agrees with. The Emperor states, "The Imperial banner shall fly over every city in Storm, the continent in which both they, Rosaria, the Iron Kingdom, and the Dalmacian Republic reside." And given that we know they have a military force made up of dragoons, it's been shown within the trailers that this ambition will lead them to invading Rosaria, something that will likely set the scene during the game's early hours. The Dalmacian Republic seems to have also been thrust into a conflict, but based on the words of Hugo Kupka, it is not one they started. He states that they were goaded into war without any thought as to the chaos it might reap. The Kingdom of Wallode, after much conquest of their own, have unified the entire continent of Ash. Nothing new was revealed as to their ambitions within the trailer, but lore provided on the official website stated that they are now looking to test their military might against their contemporaries on the Storm continent. And then there's the Iron Kingdom, who seem hell-bent on destroying everyone who does not adhere to their ideals. It sets Storm as the battleground for many conflicts, with each of the nations looking to fight for a variety of reasons. And what's interesting is that because of this, even though certain nations have been stylized as either being good or bad, it feels like many actions will fall in the middle, with who's right or wrong being left down to interpretation. If that's the case, it would make a lot of sense, given that the original screenplay was written by Mayahiro, someone who worked on Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, and Final Fantasy XII, 3 games where issues of morality and perspective are front and center. According to Yoshida, the narrative itself has been designed to have a focus on human drama, and this is a very interesting choice of words, as it's an objective that Yasumi Matsuno had when developing the narrative for Tactics. Over 25 years ago, it saw Matsuno craft a narrative that was deep-rooted in human drama, quite the opposite of prior Final Fantasy games that had been released up until that point. Political factions would be seen fighting against each other, with the consequences of their actions laid bare for all to see. But Matsuno was also very good at making sure the motivations of all sides, no matter how questionable they may seem, were also morally grey, with no defined good or bad sides outside of what was superficial. It's interesting, therefore, that Yoshida would use those words in relation to Final Fantasy XVI, as he has been very open about his admiration for Matsuno, previously stating that Tactics Ogre, which has just been re-released as Tactics Ogre Reborn, was one of the games that inspired him to pursue video game development as a career. Now, one of the central pillars of the narrative will be the Eikons. Mayahiro revealed that it was decided early on that summons will be a focal point of the narrative. They wanted to create an intriguing world where the role of summons will be elevated beyond what would typically be seen within a Final Fantasy game. This means that instead of just popping up sporadically to perform some fancy moves or being bystanders relegated to having either no lore at all or lore that was rooted in the past, Final Fantasy XVI will feature summons that will help to shape the present world. Renamed to Eikons, they will each be related to specific in-world characters known as dominants. And these dominants will be integral to the story, not least because of the burden they carry. It's been revealed that each time a dominant uses their power, they come one step closer to death. So even though their power is quite extreme, it must be used sparingly, otherwise their time amongst the living will be cut quite short. So far, 8 Eikons have now been unveiled, with the 9th speculated upon within the Dominance trailer. It means we have Eikons associated with the majority of the traditional Final Fantasy elements, as Phoenix and Ifrit are associated with fire, Shiva with ice, Titan with earth, Ramu with lightning or thunder, Garuda with wind, Odin with dark, and Bahamut with light. It feels quite complete except for one element, water. To that end, even though nothing has been revealed thus far in an official sense, Leviathan was shown within the trailer, albeit via a mural. When addressing this, Mayahiro said, "The mural shown at the end of the trailer was painted in an ancient age, many aeons ago. So you can consider these icons appearing in the mural as the icons that have historically existed in Valisthea. I can't say anything more about the mural at this point in time, and it may actually be a little tricky to answer whether all those icons shown in the mural will appear. Regardless, any more than this is still a secret." Based on this, it's possible that Leviathan existed in the past but has yet to manifest within the current timeline. In terms of the dominants themselves, the previous trailer revealed that Benedicta Harmon and Hugo Kupka would appear as the dominants of Garuda and Titan respectively. Now, thanks to the Ambition trailer, we know that the dominant of Bahamut will be Dion Lesage and the dominant of Odin will be Barnabas Tharma. Within the trailer, we see Dion Lesage speaking with his father, the Holy Emperor of Sanbreque. During this scene, the Emperor speaks of his thirst for power, but it's clear that Dion does not share that same thirst. And that's perhaps because even though Dion is a celebrated dragoon and is well liked amongst the population thanks to his martial prowess, he knows that victories often require sacrifices that he is duty-bound to perform. What's also intriguing here is the clear association with the dragoon job, and he is even responsible for leading a company of dragoons. In the past, this job has almost always been aligned with characters that have a strong change of heart or split allegiance, with Richard Highwind, Kane Highwind, Estenian Wormblood and Aranea Highwind all being prominent examples. Whether Dion's story will follow a similar path remains to be seen, but it wouldn't be out of the question for him to betray the Empire. Another seed here seems to be that while Dion must be a paragon of discipline, his siblings seem to have been given much more freedom, no doubt because they don't have the same level of responsibility, having not been anointed as a dominant. Unlike Dion, who was raised within the prosperous empire, Barnabas was a vagrant. Little is known about where he was born, but he was able to use his special abilities gifted to him by being the dominant of Odin to land on the shores of the Ash continent and then grind his way to power. It saw Barnabas crush the spirits of the numerous beast tribes that resided on Ash until they relented and accepted his rule. With Ash now under his command, Barnabas, who is said to love combat and bloodshed, has set his eyes on a much grander conflict with the entire Storm continent. Within the Dominance trailer, we got to see Odin square off against Bahamut, suggesting that there will either be a prominent conflict that takes place between these two powerhouses, or that they were at odds with each other in the past. Either way, the other confirmed element is that Benedicta is within the employ of Barnabas, further adding to their threat, as not only is she the dominant of Garuda, she's also an expert at espionage. The other very interesting piece of information relating to Eikons was quite unexpected. It had long been thought that Jill Warwick would be the dominant of Shiva. After all, she hailed from the colder northern territories, and her outfit colours were aligned with that of Shiva's typical colour palette. It's still not 100% confirmed that the two are linked, but it has been heavily hinted at, not least because the PlayStation blog featured a picture of grown-up Jill with the caption "Master of Ice and Blade," which was rather unsubtle. This also confirms that Jill will follow Clive through at least one of the time skips. This means that the only icons without their dominance revealed are the two versions of Ifrit, the unknown icon, and Ramu, although current speculation points towards this guy being the dominant of Ramu. And based on how things have gone with both Dion and Barnabas, who were both briefly shown within the Dominance trailer before their full reveals in the Ambition trailer, it's only a matter of time before this individual is named. One other thing that's curious here though relates to the strength of the icons. In the past, icons or summons have often had a hierarchy of power, with Bahamut serving as one of the strongest recurring summons. However, in Final Fantasy XVI, it's been revealed that while their attributes may differ, either in terms of their size or the literal elements such as the ability to fly, each icon has the same base strength. No one icon is stronger than another. What does matter though is the dominant. Yoshida used Gundam as a metaphor for how this works in the game. He noted that while a Gundam suit itself may have a set limitation on its power, its effectiveness in combat will depend on who's at the helm. And in Final Fantasy XVI, it will be much the same, which is no doubt why we saw Bahamut and Odin squaring off against each other, as it sounds like Dion and Barnabas are very well versed in the art of war and how to wield the powers they possess to great effectiveness. So now that we know all of this, what's next? Well, Yoshida shared with Famitsu that the game is currently 95% complete. At the moment, they're doing extreme playtesting as they attempt to iron out any kinks relating to performance and rendering issues, as well as trying to find as many bugs as they can. Based on this, Yoshida is very confident the game will not suffer any delays, noting that Final Fantasy XVI will not release any later than summer 2023, its current release window. If this becomes a reality, it will be the first time in a while that a major Final Fantasy game or associated project has not been delayed, with the Final Fantasy VII Remake suffering a short delay and Final Fantasy XV notoriously being delayed by 2 months. With the proposed release date locked down, from an internal perspective at least, Yoshida is now confident that they can start the marketing machine in earnest, a typical approach for Square Enix, who like to ramp things up between 6 to 9 months before a game launches. This means that there will be another information dump before the end of the year, at which point they plan to share the actual release date for the game. They are also planning to release a demo prior to launch, something that Yoshida revealed when speaking to Dengeki. This will allow players to check out the game for themselves, hopefully with the objective of allaying fears relating to the new action-orientated approach. But unlike previous demos, this one should be quite fine-tuned, as opposed to it being released to gather feedback from the player base. We're curious to know though, based on what you've seen so far, how are you feeling about Final Fantasy XVI? Are you happy with what you've seen? Or are you still hoping that Square Enix deep down will decide to abandon their fascination with action RPGs to produce a big budget turn-based game featuring the Final Fantasy name? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to check out the Final Fantasy XVI survey that we've linked in the description. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, Galcian de Kujata, Gregory and Lord of Morning, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.